Could you define what a staff engineering role means?
And this is really why I started thinking about this problem at my last job. In particular, I started being responsible for coaching all these different staff engineers. And a lot of them were having these kind of existential like angst, just like, what is my job and like, how am I being evaluated? And then, as a manager, like, well, of course I have the answers for you, but you're like, I actually like really didn't have the answers for them. So it's like,
Yeah.
what do I tell them? And so I just wanted to understand the problem space better in terms of like, how do I actually give like honest, like useful advice to folks? And I just wasn't really sure what to say at that point. And that's where I started kind of by just talking to a bunch of different folks in different companies and trying to understand the space. And so from that, I think the first answer is like, every staff role is a little bit different. There's no such thing as this one standard across different companies. But there are some standards that you can kind of see in the industry. So first, like the most common progression is kind of a mid-level engineer, a senior engineer, a staff engineer, a principal engineer. Then a distinguished engineer would be kind of on the top of that. A lot of companies don't have all of those. And I would even say most small companies with less than like 50 engineers probably shouldn't have any of the kind of senior plus ones. But some do. And so then within them, it's like, okay, so you have like a hierarchy, but is this just like a senior, like 7 years of experience, is staff like 12 years of experience, is principal like 16? Is it just something like that literal? And it's like a little bit different. It's really, as I've talked to more folks, this idea of like archetypes is how I've started to explain it, where there's kind of a team lead who's someone who's like really giving a lot of direction, support, and enablement, partnering really closely with usually a product manager and usually an engineering manager about how the team's technology roadmap and execution works. I found this idea of the solver, where most companies are now very team oriented, but often you'll find people just like floating around in organizations, kind of bouncing from problem to problem, particularly like the biggest problems that the company leadership sees. So for example, a couple of years ago, like GDPR is a great example of a problem that a lot of companies like decided to put off as long as humanly possible. And all of a sudden there's this like actual like mile like deadline looming. And then they kind of like brought in like their solvers to figure out how to actually get on the right side of it. The other two that I found is this idea of this architect. So it's funny, like in the period of time that I came up in the industry, there's no title like more hated than the architect, right? Where it's like no architects is like the number one goal for like most teams, where you're interviewing a company and like, oh, we have architects here. And you're like, I just don't think I can come work here after all.
Red
like,
flag.
Really, yeah, just huge red flag, right? But it's funny because it's actually really valuable work. It's just the old style of what an architect was like top down, ignored the teams, like the impact on the teams of their behaviors. And this was just the old style of management in a lot of ways, right? Where like leadership thought they gave direction and didn't have to think much about the team. So there's a new age of kind of architects who are collaborative, understanding the user's needs, empowering the teams they're working with. And I see this role at a lot of different companies now, where it's usually not called an architect. What they're doing is like actually architecture.